In the burning silence of the desert, where life survives only by instinct, a lost mountain lion cub faces a pack of hungry coyotes. Just when hope seems gone, an aging ranger appears, not as a hero, but as a man haunted by old wounds. His choice to save one fragile life will defy nature's cruelest rule and lead to a story of redemption, compassion, and the fragile balance between man and the wild. The Sonoran Desert never whispers. It burns, breathes, and punishes. By noon, the air rippled above the sand like heat rising from an open furnace, turning every horizon into a mirage. The wind carried dust that stung the eyes and filled the lungs with grit. Out here, even silence felt sharp, and every living thing learned quickly. You either adapt or you disappear. A lone mountain lion cub stumbled between the spiny arms of a cholla cactus, her paws raw from rock and sun. She was small, too small to be alone in this kind of country. Her name, not that anyone knew it yet, was Luna. She had been born beneath a ledge of red stone not far from the Santa Catalina foothills, where her mother hunted jackrabbits by moonlight. But 3 nights ago, a dry storm swept across the valley, splitting the sky in white veins of lightning and choking the air with dust. The mother had gone out before dawn to find water. She never returned. Now, Luna's ribs showed beneath her soft golden coat, and her tongue hung dry between her teeth. The desert sun didn't care how young she was. It baked her shadow flat against the ground as she wandered in circles, mewing weakly into the emptiness. The scent of coyote drifted faintly in the wind, musky, sharp, alive. Luna froze, her ears twitching toward the sound of padded feet somewhere beyond the dunes. Instinct screamed at her to hide, but hunger whispered louder. Ahead, a thin gleam of light shimmered off what looked like water pooled between 2 slabs of stone. She limped toward it, stepping carefully around brittle sagebrush, her claws scraping the rock. When she reached the edge, the water turned out to be little more than a shallow depression, filled with runoff from last night's rare rain. It was warm and muddy, but to her it was salvation. She bent to drink, shivering with relief. A sudden gust shifted the air. From behind her came a low growl, soft, cautious, almost conversational. She turned her head slowly. At the crest of the dune stood 3 coyotes, their outlines glowing orange in the afternoon light. They didn't charge. Not yet. They were measuring her, tails stiff, ears forward. The biggest one, scarred over one eye, stepped down the slope and sniffed the air. The leader of the hunt. Luna backed away from the puddle, her tiny claws raking sand. The coyotes followed in a fan, deliberate, their bodies sleek and confident. The desert, for all its beauty, ran on the oldest economy there was, survival. And this, to them, was lunch. Miles away, the hum of an engine broke the desert stillness. A tan Ford Ranger rolled over a washboard trail, its tires spitting pebbles behind it. Behind the wheel sat Ethan Cole, a senior ranger with 20 years in wildlife enforcement. His face creased and weathered like old leather. He drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting near his radio, scanning for movement on the digital map fixed to the dash. A blinking dot pulsed red near a restricted zone, motion detected on a wildlife sensor set up to monitor predatory activity. Ethan frowned. That zone had been quiet for months. "Coyotes again," he muttered, pulling his sunglasses down. He was supposed to check the old solar panels at the northern outpost, but experience told him this kind of alert meant trouble. And trouble in the desert often came fast and silent. He turned the truck sharply onto a narrow service road that wound through brittle mesquite trees, his tires crunching over gravel. In the passenger seat, A paper cup of coffee trembled in its holder. Ethan reached for it, then stopped, staring instead at the worn bracelet on his wrist. Woven paracord faded from sun and sweat. His late daughter, Emily, had made it for him on her last camping trip before the accident. He still wore it every day, though the elastic had started to fray. The radio crackled. A static hum, then a faint, broken sound. An animal cry. Ethan froze, turning the volume up. He knew the voice of the desert the way a sailor knows the sea. He could tell the difference between the shriek of a hawk, the whimper of a coyote pup, and something else entirely. This was fear. He slowed the truck, eyes narrowing toward the rocky ridge ahead. Back at the puddle, Luna pressed herself against the stone wall, her body trembling. The coyotes closed in, cautious but relentless. Their paws moved soundlessly over the sand, their eyes flicking to one another in wordless coordination. The alpha, Scar, crept closer until his shadow fell over the cub. Luna hissed weakly, her fur standing on end. Scar tilted his head. Then, with a quick lunge, he snapped his jaws inches from her face, testing her reaction. The cub bolted sideways, trying to squeeze into a crack between two rocks, but her paw slipped on the loose gravel. She fell forward, rolling down a small incline, landing hard in the dust. The coyotes followed, their excitement growing, each step faster, each growl lower. She ran. Her little body moved with desperate strength she didn't know she had. The desert blurred. Cactus, rock, dust. She could hear their breathing behind her, the click of claws on stone. The chase wasn't about hunger anymore. It was about the rhythm of the hunt, the dance of predator and prey that had played out since the beginning of time. A cry ripped from her throat, part roar, part plea. The sound carried far, bouncing off canyon walls. It reached Ethan's ears just as he crested the ridge. He killed the engine. The sudden silence roared in his ears. He stepped out into the heat, scanning the open land with binoculars. At first, there was nothing, only wind and sand. Then he saw it. Movement, small and frantic, at the base of a rock formation. A tawny shape darting between shadows, pursued by gray flashes of fur. Coyotes. A cub. Ethan cursed under his breath and slung his tranquilizer rifle over his shoulder. Regulations said he wasn't supposed to interfere unless it involved endangered species or human safety. Mountain lions weren't endangered here. Not officially. But the sight of that tiny creature fighting for its life twisted something inside him. He started down the ridge, boots sliding over gravel. Luna scrambled behind a half-fallen log, panting. The alpha trotted closer, head low, tail rigid. He barked once, sharp and cruel, and the others moved in. One bit her hind leg. She screamed, a thin, human-like sound that froze the blood. The sound echoed across the sand and straight into Ethan's chest. His pulse hammered in his ears. He raised the rifle, hesitated, his finger hovering over the trigger. The wind shifted, carrying Luna's scent toward him. Blood, fear, dust. Something in that moment broke through the professional calm he had spent years building. He fired. The dart hit the ground near the lead coyote's paws, releasing a hiss of compressed air and a cloud of deterrent gas. The animals yelped and scattered, vanishing into the haze. The desert went still again, the silence heavy and stunned. Ethan lowered his weapon and walked slowly forward. The cub was still there, trembling, one leg dragging slightly. Her eyes, wide, golden, too knowing, locked on his. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Luna took one shaky step toward him and collapsed. Ethan knelt beside her, brushing sand from her fur. "Easy, kid," he murmured, his voice rough. "You're gonna be all right." He took off his jacket, sun-bleached canvas with his ranger patch half torn, and wrapped her gently inside it. Her heartbeat thudded weakly against his chest as he lifted her. She weighed almost nothing. Above them, the wind carried a faint howl from far off in the desert. The coyotes weren't gone for good. But for now, the only sound left was Ethan's steady breathing and the faint rustle of fur against cloth. He glanced once more at the endless horizon before heading back toward his truck. The cub cradled close. "Looks like we're breaking a few rules today," he muttered. The desert swallowed his footsteps, keeping its secrets as it always had. But if you'd listened carefully, you might have heard another sound layered under the wind, small, steady, and alive, the heartbeat of something fragile that had refused to die. And far above, circling in the haze, a hawk cried once, a warning, or maybe a blessing. Either way, the desert heard it, and it remembered. The desert morning began with the sound of wind scraping over stone. The sky was colorless at first, then it bled slowly into gold, washing over the endless ridges of sand and rock. Ethan Cole's truck rumbled along a dried creek bed, its tires leaving deep tracks in the dust. The air was cool enough to breathe without pain, but it carried the kind of stillness that warned how fast things could turn. The cub was wrapped in Ethan's jacket, tucked beside him on the passenger seat. Every few minutes, he glanced down, checking to see if she was still breathing. Her fur was crusted with sand, her belly barely rising. He'd splashed a bit of water on her muzzle from his canteen, and she'd licked once, weakly, before falling still again. He didn't know if she'd make it to the station. Ethan's radio crackled. "Unit 4, this is base. You're off route again." "Copy that," he said, keeping his eyes on the road. "Had an incident with a juvenile predator. Taking it to Desert Edge Sanctuary." "Protocol reminder, Ranger," the voice replied. "Too clean, too bureaucratic. We're not authorized to interfere with predation events unless it involves protected species." He exhaled through his nose, the way men do when the conversation is over, but they can't hang up. "Understood." Then he switched the radio off. For a while, there was only the hum of the engine. The desert outside was waking. Quail darting from brush, a hawk tracing spirals overhead. The light spilled through the windshield, hitting the cub's fur, turning the gold in her coat into living fire. Something about it. So small, so alive despite everything, tugged at him. He thought of Emily again. She'd been 8, fearless, obsessed with mountain lions. She used to draw them in his notebooks, big paws, soft eyes, sharp teeth. She'd tell him, "They're just like us, Dad. They fight, they rest, they raise their kids. They just don't lie about it." When she died, he'd promised himself never to get attached again. Animals, people, anything. But promises made in pain rarely survive long in the real world. A few miles later, the road straightened, and the building came into view. A squat, sun-bleached structure crouched against the horizon. Desert Edge Wildlife Sanctuary. The faded sign flapped in the wind, half buried by drifting sand. The place wasn't much, but it was all they had between Tucson and the Mexico border. He parked, cut the engine, and sat still for a second. The cub stirred weakly, her head bumping against his arm. "You made it, kid," he whispered. "Welcome to civilization." Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and hay. Dr. Maya Lopez looked up from a tray of surgical tools, her dark hair tied in a rough braid, her face still half asleep. "You're early, Cole," she said, then saw what he was holding. "Oh my God." He laid the small bundle on the stainless steel table. Maya peeled back the jacket. Luna blinked once at the sudden light and shut her eyes again. "What happened?" Maya asked. "Coyotes," he said. "She's dehydrated. Blood loss from the hind leg. Found her near the canyon." Maya's eyes flicked up. "You know the policy. We can't—" "Yeah," he interrupted quietly. "I know the policy." There was a long silence, broken only by the sound of the monitor beeping as Maya clipped sensors to the cub's paw. She moved with the focus of someone who's seen too much suffering to waste time arguing about it. "She's only a few months old," she murmured. "Her temperature's dangerously low. You're lucky you brought her in when you did." He leaned against the wall, arms folded. "Lucky wasn't the word I was thinking." Maya looked up at him, frowning. "You ever wonder why you still do this job, Ethan? You talk about protocol like it's a religion, but your hands keep breaking the rules." He didn't answer. She was right, and they both knew it. Over the next hour, they worked in quiet rhythm. Maya cleaned and wrapped the wound, started fluids, checked reflexes. Ethan fetched towels, warmed saline, did whatever she asked. It wasn't until the cub made a small sound, something between a sigh and a purr, that either of them exhaled. "She'll need a name," Maya said softly. "I was thinking Luna," he replied. Maya smiled faintly. "Moonchild in the desert. Fitting. For the first time in months, maybe years." Ethan smiled back. Outside, the wind rose again, rattling the metal roof. Somewhere beyond the walls, a chorus of coyotes sang, their voices twisting together to something that sounded like laughter and mourning at once. Ethan walked to the window and stared out toward the horizon. The desert stretched forever, glittering under the noon sun. "They're still out there," Maya said. "Yeah," he replied. "They always are." That night, after the others had gone home, Ethan stayed. The sanctuary lights buzzed softly, casting long shadows across the floor. Luna lay in a padded crate beside the workstation, her breathing steady now, her eyes half open. He sat nearby, a paper cup of lukewarm coffee in his hand, his phone on the table beside it. A news alert blinked across the screen. New report shows rising conflicts between coyotes and livestock in Arizona ranching areas. The article was linked to a state conservation program he'd helped design, a pilot project about predator balance and humane deterrence. He skimmed the first few lines, then shut it off. He'd spent years writing policies about balance. Now balance was sleeping 6 feet away, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like him. The heater clicked on. Warm air drifted through the room. Luna stirred, lifting her head. Her eyes caught the light, amber, watchful, too wise for her age. Ethan leaned forward slowly, resting his hand on the edge of the crate. She didn't flinch this time. Her gaze followed his movements, and for a second, the world outside, news, protocol, everything, fell away. "You're tougher than you look," he said softly. "Desert's got nothing on you." She blinked once, then lowered her head, eyes closing again. When he finally stood to leave, he paused at the door. Maya's voice came from behind him. "You know she'll have to go back, right?" He turned. "Yeah, when she's ready." "Coyotes don't forget, Ethan," she said quietly. "Neither do mountain lions." He gave a tired half smile. "Good thing people do." Outside, the night spread wide and endless, the stars flickering like distant campfires. The desert seemed to breathe again, slower now, as if the storm had passed. But not far from the sanctuary, among the dark mesquite and stone, the coyotes gathered once more. Scar stood at the center, one eye glinting in the moonlight, his nose to the wind. He sniffed, recognizing the faint scent of human and cub. The pack fell silent, waiting. Scar lifted his muzzle and let out a low, drawn-out howl that carried for miles, long enough to find its way to Luna's dreaming ears. Inside her crate, she twitched, a small paw moving against the blanket. Her tail flicked once. The desert had given her a second chance. But second chances out here came at a price. And before long, someone, or something, would come to collect it. The desert had a way of testing every promise. By the third week, the wounds on Luna's hind leg had closed, leaving only a faint scar under her fur. She was stronger now, eating, stretching, and sometimes snarling at her reflection in the steel wall of her enclosure. But the look in her eyes was changing. It was no longer the gaze of something broken. It was the stare of something waiting to reclaim its place in the wild. Ethan noticed it every time he walked past. The cub's patience, the twitch of her tail, the restless pacing before dawn. She was healing fast, too fast for him to be comfortable. Maya said it was a good sign. He wasn't so sure. In his world, recovery always meant the storm was coming. Her instincts are coming back, Maya said one morning, jotting notes on her tablet. She's eating on her own again. That's excellent progress. Yeah, Ethan muttered. Progress. He leaned on the railing, watching Luna crouch low over a rubber mouse toy, her muscles coiled like springs. With one silent leap, she pounced and tore it in half. Foam spilled across the floor. Maya smiled. See? That's the kind of energy we want. Ethan's eyes stayed on the cub. You ever notice the look they get right before they go wild again? Maya paused, then nodded slowly. You mean before they remember who they are? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Outside the sanctuary walls, the desert hummed with quiet menace. The coyotes were still out there, Scar and his pack. Motion sensors had picked them up twice in the last week, moving closer to the perimeter at night. The tracks told a story Ethan didn't like. Circling patterns, testing for weakness. They weren't hunting livestock anymore. They were looking for something else. By late afternoon, clouds began to gather over the Santa Catalina Mountains, heavy with the promise of rare rain. The scent of electricity clung to the wind. Ethan stood by the fence line, tightening the latches on a gate that hadn't been secure since the last storm. He could feel the air changing, the same way he could sense a shift in stock markets or oil prices before they moved. Patterns, invisible but predictable. Out here, the currency wasn't money. It was survival. He heard footsteps crunching behind him. You worry too much, Maya said, stepping up beside him. She wore a denim jacket and a sun hat too big for her, the brim flapping in the wind. Coyotes adapt faster than we fix fences, Ethan replied. That's worth worrying about. Maya tilted her head, studying him. Or maybe you just don't trust happy endings. He glanced toward the enclosure. Luna had climbed the small rock structure in her pen, eyes fixed on the horizon, as though she could see something far beyond the walls. In the desert, he said, happy endings don't come free. That night, the storm arrived. The wind hit first, hurling dust and grit against the sanctuary, windows. Thunder rolled in the distance, low and steady, like a drumbeat announcing something ancient. Lightning flashed across the sky, revealing the outline of the mountains in a split-second silhouette. Ethan moved from one enclosure to the next, checking locks, securing doors, his flashlight cutting through sheets of rain. Then he saw the hole. A section of the chain-link fence had come loose where the dry creek bed met the outer wall. The ground beneath had eroded, leaving a narrow gap. just wide enough for something small and determined to slip through. "Damn it," he hissed. He turned to go back for tools, but the radio on his belt crackled sharply. Maya's voice came through, tight and breathless. "Ethan, Luna's enclosure is empty." He froze. "Say that again." "She's gone." He sprinted toward the holding area, boots splashing through puddles. The gate to Luna's pen hung open, swinging on its hinge. The latch was bent. Her tracks led straight toward the outer fence and the gap he'd just found. Maya met him halfway, drenched and shaking. "How could she?" "She smelled freedom," he said flatly, and followed it. They grabbed flashlights and headed into the storm. The desert had transformed under the downpour. Washes filled with water, arroyos turned into rivers of mud. Visibility was near zero. Ethan moved in sweeping arcs, scanning the ground for tracks, calling softly, "Luna, easy girl." Lightning split the sky. For an instant, he saw her, standing on a rock outcrop 50 yards away, her small body outlined in silver light. Her fur clung to her sides, eyes wide and wild. Then she turned and vanished into the darkness. "Ethan, wait!" Maya shouted as he took off after her. The rain stung his face, mud sucking at his boots. He stumbled twice, caught himself, kept going. The flashlight beam caught movement ahead, Luna darting between boulders, fast and sure despite her size. He was closing the distance when another sound cut through the storm. A howl. It came from the left, low and rising, then another and another. Coyotes. The same pack. He could hear their paws splashing through water, circling, closing in. "God," he whispered. "Not again." Maya's voice came faintly from the radio, calling his name, but he barely heard it. His lungs burned. The rain hit harder, a solid sheet now. He reached the base of a rocky slope just as the first coyote appeared, Scar, unmistakable with the milky eye and jagged muzzle. He stopped and looked right at Ethan, unafraid, as if he remembered. Ethan raised his rifle, but the wind made aiming impossible. Scar barked once, sharp as a gunshot, and the pack fanned out. Ethan knew that pattern. It was a coordinated drive. They weren't coming for him. They were driving Luna toward the gorge behind her. He turned, shouting her name, but his voice drowned in the storm. Luna ran. The lightning framed her in white light, every muscle coiled, her tail whipping for balance. She leapt over rocks slick with rain, scrambled up a narrow ledge. Scar followed, relentless. Then the ground gave way. The ledge crumbled under her paws, and she slid, claws scraping stone. She managed to catch herself on a lower shelf, clinging to a root, her small body shaking. The coyotes gathered above, their shapes dark against the sky. Scar stood at the edge, head tilted, watching her struggle. Ethan aimed again, wiped rain from his eyes, and fired a shot into the air. The sound cracked like thunder. The coyotes flinched, but didn't retreat. Scar only bared his teeth. "Get back!" Ethan shouted, stepping closer. "Not this time." A flash of lightning blinded him, and when his vision cleared, the coyotes were gone, melted into the storm. He scrambled down the slope toward the ledge where Luna clung. "Easy, kid," he said, reaching out. "I've got you." Her claws slipped once, twice. He grabbed her by the scruff just as she lost her grip, pulling her close against his chest. She shook violently, her tiny heart hammering. He carried her back toward the truck, the rain easing to a whisper behind them. The storm was passing, but something deeper had settled between them. A promise made in silence, forged in fear. When they reached the sanctuary, Maya was waiting at the gate, flashlight trembling in her hand. She saw the cub in his arms and let out a shaky breath. "You found her." "Yeah," he said softly. "But the hunt's not over." She frowned. "What do you mean?" He looked back toward the dark horizon, where the last echo of a howl rolled across the desert. "They'll come again, and next time they won't just be hunting her." He didn't explain what he meant, not yet. But deep down, he understood the desert's message. Every rescue carries a price, and every act of mercy rewrites the laws of survival. As dawn crept over the mountains, the storm clouds broke apart, leaving the sand damp and glistening. Luna slept in her crate again, safe for now. Ethan stood by the window, coffee cooling in his hand, staring at the empty plain beyond the fence. He thought of the storm, the hunt, the way the world always seemed to test what you loved most. And he realized the truth he'd been avoiding all along. The desert doesn't forgive. It only remembers who owed it something. The next morning broke without mercy. The desert glowed with the washed, clean light that always followed a storm, sharp enough to make even distant mountains look close. The world smelled of wet earth and mesquite sap, but inside the sanctuary, the air was heavy. Ethan hadn't slept. He sat at his desk, staring at the damp boots by the door and the mud drying on his jacket. Across the room, Luna rested in her crate, breathing softly, her fur still rough from the rain. She had eaten a little before dawn and then curled up, trusting the quiet. That trust hurt him more than the bruises on his arms. The radio on the table crackled to life. "Ranger Cole, this is Regional Office. We received a report of shots fired last night near your coordinates. You want to tell us what happened?" Ethan pinched the bridge of his nose. "Deterrent round. Coyotes. No casualties." "Still, that's a violation of the non-intervention clause. Paperwork's coming your way." He switched the unit off before the voice finished. Paperwork. Always paperwork. You could rescue a life or lose one, and in the end, the system cared only for the form you filled out afterward. Outside, Maya was already at the pens, feeding the birds they'd taken in after the storm. 2 red-tailed hawks, one with a broken wing. She looked up as he stepped out. "You should rest," she said. "I don't rest," he replied. "I just pause." She gave him a tired smile. "You did what you had to. Don't let them make you doubt that." Ethan glanced toward the horizon, where dust already rose in the distance. The coyotes would be ranging again. "You think nature forgives mistakes?" he asked. "I think it remembers balance," Maya said. "That's not the same thing." He nodded, but said nothing. Balance. That word had chased him his entire career. On wildlife reports, conservation meetings, even on the glossy brochures about renewable energy and environmental sustainability that the department loved to print. It sounded clean, scientific, almost profitable. But in the field, balance meant blood. Something lived because something else didn't. By afternoon, the temperature climbed past 90. The sanctuary shimmered like a mirage. Luna was awake again, pacing the crate, restless. Ethan opened the top gate, letting her sniff the air. She tilted her head toward the sound of wind pushing against the fence line. For a second, her ears pricked, the same direction where Scar's pack had been last seen. "She remembers," Maya said quietly behind him. "Yeah," Ethan murmured. "So do I." He closed the latch and turned away. But the thought followed him. If the coyotes came back, the sanctuary wouldn't hold. The fence was too old, the alarms unreliable. And if they got in again, he wouldn't have time to wait for approval from anyone. That evening, he drove into town for supplies, new batteries, floodlights, a replacement panel for the gate. On his way back. The radio carried a local news segment about increasing conflicts between wildlife and human development. The anchor's voice was smooth, careful, peppered with sponsor ads for home insurance, outdoor safety gear, and solar technology, the kind of things city people bought to feel prepared for a world they didn't really understand. He turned the volume down. Out here, preparation wasn't something you ordered online. It was the weight of a rifle and the decision to use it. When he returned, the sun was sliding low, painting everything bronze. Maya was standing by the outer fence, her hair whipped by the wind. "Sensors tripped again," she said. "North Ridge." He tightened his jaw. "I'll check it." "I'm coming with you." They moved out together, the light fading fast. The desert at dusk was beautiful in that unsettling way. Quiet but alive, shadows stretching long and thin like warning signs. The ridge wasn't far, maybe half a mile, but each step carried the tension of men walking toward something they couldn't yet see. The sensor post lay half buried in sand, the red light flickering. Around it, fresh paw prints cut into the damp ground. 5 sets, small but deep. "Coyotes," Maya whispered. Ethan crouched, touching one of the prints. The edges were sharp. Less than an hour old. He straightened slowly. "They're watching us." As if on cue, a low growl rippled from the dark. Shapes shifted between the mesquite branches. Yellow eyes blinked, reflecting the last light. "Back to the truck," he said. But before they moved, Scar stepped out onto the open sand, the others fanning behind him. His fur was still matted from the rain, but his body language was clear. This was no random hunt. It was a message. Ethan raised the tranquilizer rifle, the barrel steady. "Don't make me do this," he muttered. Maya's voice trembled. "You can't shoot, not without clearance." He cut her off. "They're testing boundaries. If they take 1 step closer, they'll take 10 tomorrow." Scar barked once. The sound echoed like a challenge. Ethan fired a warning shot, the dart hissing past the alpha's shoulder. The pack scattered, vanishing into the brush. But Scar didn't run. He stared straight at Ethan for a long heartbeat, then turned and loped away, unhurried. Maya exhaled shakily. "He's not afraid of you." "Fear's temporary," Ethan said, lowering the rifle. "Memory lasts longer." Back inside, the sanctuary lights flickered to life. Luna was waiting near the gate of her pen, pacing again. When Ethan knelt, she stopped, eyes meeting his. He reached in and brushed his fingers along her fur. It was warm, alive, defiant. "You're not meant to live behind fences," he said quietly. Maya heard him from the doorway. "Then what are you going to do?" He didn't look up. "What I should have done the day I found her." Later that night, he sat at his desk, filling out the same government forms he'd ignored before. Only this time, he wrote what he knew they wanted to hear. No interference, minimal contact, routine patrol. Lies printed neatly in black ink. When he finished, he folded the pages and placed them in the outgoing tray. Then he took out a different sheet of paper, a single page headed Independent Relocation Plan. At the bottom he wrote, "To be executed at first dawn, Mountain Lion release, unregistered." When the first light broke across the horizon, Ethan stood by the truck, gear packed. Luna was already inside a transport cage, calm, as if she understood. Maya appeared from the doorway, arms crossed. "You're really doing this?" "She's ready," he said. "You'll lose your job." He closed the latch on the cage. "Maybe it's time." She stepped closer, her voice soft. "You can't fix every wound, Ethan. Not hers, not yours." He gave her a faint smile. "Maybe not." but I can give her a chance. He climbed into the truck, the engine coughing to life. The tires rolled over the dirt, heading toward the open desert. The sun climbed higher, turning the sand to gold. Behind him, Maya watched until the dust swallowed the taillights. Then she whispered to herself, "Balance." Out on the trail, Ethan kept his eyes forward. Every mile carried him closer to the line between rule and redemption. The coyotes were out there somewhere, watching, waiting. He could feel it. The desert had stopped punishing him for breaking its rules. Now it was watching to see if he'd keep his own. He tightened his grip on the wheel. Whatever happened next would not be by accident. It would be a choice, a decision carved into the same ground where every life here was written, erased, and written again. The ranger was finally going to choose. And this time, there would be no paperwork. The sun rose pale and quiet over the desert, washing the land in the color of old bone. Ethan's truck rolled along the empty trail that led toward the mountains. The air still cool enough that his breath fogged the glass. In the back seat, Luna rested in her transport cage, eyes half closed, her body swaying gently with every bump in the road. She looked peaceful, but he knew that peace in the wild was never real. It was just the pause between one danger and the next. He drove in silence for a long time. The only sound came from the tires crunching over gravel and the low hum of the radio, tuned to an AM news station that talked about rising insurance rates, wildfire risk, and new federal programs for renewable energy and conservation grants. The irony wasn't lost on him. People miles away were arguing about saving the planet while he was just trying to save one creature on a forgotten road. At mile marker 63, the dirt path split into two. One branch led north toward the observation ridge. The other veered west, into the foothills of the Santa Catalina Range. That's where he was headed. He'd scouted the area years ago, rocky cliffs, scattered mesquite trees, and a small spring that never fully dried. The kind of place a mountain lion could disappear and never be found again. He pulled over, killed the engine, and sat still for a moment, listening. The desert wasn't silent. It breathed, a whisper of wind, the faint chirp of quail, the rasp of sand moving over stone. He stepped out, stretched, and looked up at the ridges glowing in the first heat of morning. For the first time in years, he felt something close to calm. Then the radio on his belt crackled. "Ranger Cole, this is Lopez. You out there?" He sighed, pressing the talk button. "Copy that, Doc. What's on your mind?" You could start with not leaving in the middle of the night without clearance. Her voice carried that mix of frustration and care he'd come to expect. "You really think you can just drop her off and walk away?" "I don't think," he said quietly. "I know." There was a pause, then softer. "Ethan, she trusts you. Don't make her just another case file." He hesitated, thumb resting on the button. "She's not a case file," he said finally. "She's the reason the rest of it still means something." He released the button, ending the call before she could answer. He turned toward the truck, opened the rear door, and unlatched the cage. Luna blinked against the light, sniffing the air. Her paws touched the ground tentatively at first, then with confidence. The wind tugged at her fur, carrying the smell of creosote and damp stone. She looked back at him once, her golden eyes catching the light. And then she started walking. Slow at first, then faster, toward the mouth of the canyon. Ethan followed at a distance, careful not to interfere. She climbed the rocks easily now, her muscles moving fluidly beneath the short, thick fur. Watching her, he realized how much she had changed since the day he found her. How much he had, too. She was no longer fragile. Neither was he. When she reached the top of the ridge, she turned and looked down at him again. For a brief moment, it felt like understanding passed between them. Not the human kind, but something deeper, quieter. Then she disappeared behind the rocks, swallowed by sunlight. Ethan stood there until the wind died. Then he walked back to the truck. It should have ended there. But as he started the engine, a shadow flickered across the dirt road behind him. At first, he thought it was his imagination, a trick of heat and light. Then he saw movement. 6 shapes running low, their fur blending with the sand. Coyotes. Scar was among them, his white eye catching the sun. They had been tracking him, maybe since the night of the storm. He slammed the truck door, reached for his rifle, and stepped out. "Not today," he muttered. The pack stopped about 50 yards away. Scar stood at the front, tail raised, teeth bared but silent. The others spread out in a semicircle, cutting off the escape route. The air between them was electric. Ethan lifted the rifle, aimed just over the alpha's head, and fired a warning shot. The dart hissed past and buried itself in the sand. The coyotes flinched, but didn't run. Scar took 1 step forward, low and deliberate. "Back off," Ethan said under his breath. "You got what you came for once." Scar's ears flicked. His gaze shifted past Ethan, to the ridge where Luna had vanished. Understanding hit Ethan like a punch to the chest. They weren't after him. They were hunting her again. He turned and ran toward the ridge, shouting her name. The rifle bounced against his shoulder as he climbed, rocks slipping under his boots. He could hear them behind him now, the coyotes closing in. Luna appeared on the ledge above, crouched low, ears flat. She growled, her tail whipping. Ethan reached her just as Scar came into view below, leading the charge. Without thinking, Ethan stepped between them, raising the rifle again. The first coyote lunged. He fired. The tranquilizer dart hit its shoulder, dropping it instantly. The others hesitated, but Scar didn't. He bounded up the slope, snarling, till he stood barely 10 feet away. Ethan's heart pounded. He met the animal's gaze, the same cold intelligence he'd seen that night in the storm. Scar wasn't just hungry. He was teaching a lesson. The wind picked up, carrying dust between them. Ethan lowered the rifle slightly, speaking in a low, steady voice. "There's enough land for both of you. Go on. Take your hunt somewhere else." Scar stared for a long moment, then turned his head toward the others and gave a short, sharp bark. The pack hesitated, then began to retreat, fading back into the brush one by one. Only when the last tail vanished did Scar move, stepping backward slowly until he, too, was gone. Ethan stood there, muscles trembling, until the silence returned. He turned to Luna, who had pressed herself against the rock, breathing hard. She looked up at him, confused, cautious, alive. "It's over," he said quietly. "You're safe now." He reached out, but she didn't move closer. Instead, she looked toward the horizon, where the line of the mountains met the pale blue sky. A faint breeze lifted her fur. Then, as if answering something ancient, she turned and walked away again, disappearing into the maze of canyons. Ethan lowered his hand. This time, he didn't follow. Back at the truck, Maya was waiting. She must have tracked his signal. Her hair was windswept, her face pale. "You okay?" He nodded. "She's gone." Maya exhaled, shoulders dropping. "That's what you wanted, right?" "Yeah," he said, though it didn't sound like him. "That's what I wanted." She looked past him toward the hills. "You think she'll make it?" He gave a slow smile. She already did. They stood there together as the heat rose, the air shimmering, Somewhere far off, a hawk cried, a sound that carried over the ridge like a benediction. The desert, for all its cruelty, had offered them both a second chance. Later that evening, as the sanctuary lights flickered on one by one, Maya brought him a cup of coffee. "To balance," she said, raising it slightly. He looked at the horizon turning orange with the last light of day and nodded. To balance. He didn't tell her that the coyotes had come back or that he'd met their eyes again. Some things were better left between a man and the land he served. When he went to his office that night, he opened the safe, took out his badge, and laid it on the desk. The metal gleamed faintly under the lamp. He stared at it for a long time before closing the drawer. There were no reports to file now, no supervisors to call. Just the quiet knowledge that somewhere out there a young mountain lion was finding her way home. He stepped outside one last time before turning in. The stars burned cold and bright above the desert. The wind smelled of rain and juniper, and far in the distance, so faint he almost missed it, came a single echoing roar, soft, proud, and alive. He smiled. "Good girl." The ranger walked back inside, closing the door behind him, leaving the desert to its silence and its stories, because out here, even mercy had to earn its place. The moon rose over the desert like a slow-burning lantern, half hidden behind drifting clouds. The air carried the scent of iron and sage, that clean edge that comes after rain. Ethan stood by the fence line of the sanctuary, watching the night settle into silence. He had spent the day repairing the eastern gate and checking the cameras, but his mind kept circling the same thought. The desert was never quiet for long. Maya had gone home hours ago, leaving him with a thermos of coffee and a warning. "If you keep living out here, the desert will start talking back," she'd said. He had laughed, but only halfway. The truth was, the desert already did. It spoke in rustles, in distant howls, in the shifting of sand under the wind. It didn't need words. It just waited for someone to listen. Inside the enclosure, the younger animals slept. The rescued hawk twitched in its sleep, dreaming of wind currents. The fox kit they'd found on the highway snored softly. Ethan made his rounds with a flashlight, moving slow, patient. It was the kind of work that had no applause but mattered anyway. Like maintaining security systems, or paying off a mortgage, or making sure a promise didn't rot. By midnight, he was back in the office. Paperwork spread across the desk. The form from the regional office sat on top. Request for explanation, line after line of bureaucratic language about protocol deviation and unauthorized wildlife relocation. He didn't even open it. Some truths couldn't fit inside boxes. He leaned back, rubbing his eyes, and almost didn't hear the sound at first. A faint metallic rattle from outside, then a thud. Another. His hand froze halfway to his coffee. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped into the yard. The air was colder now, and the wind had picked up, carrying grains of sand that hissed softly across the ground. He swung the beam toward the outer fence. The chain link shimmered faintly in the moonlight. Nothing moved. Then the light caught something near the far corner. A break in the wire, fresh, the edges curled outward. Ethan's gut tightened. Damn it. He jogged toward it, boots crunching gravel. The hole wasn't big, not yet. But something strong had started digging. He swept the flashlight around, and that's when he saw them. 2 glowing eyes just beyond the fence line. Then 4, then more. Coyotes. Scar's pack had returned. They stood still, silent, their bodies half hidden in the brush. The alpha stepped forward, his pale scar catching the light. He was closer than Ethan had ever seen him, close enough that he could see the rise and fall of the animal's chest. There was no growl this time, no sound at all, only intent. Ethan raised his voice. "Not tonight." The alpha blinked slowly, unimpressed. Then, with a sudden burst of movement, he lunged at the fence. The wire groaned. Another coyote joined, claws scraping. The others began to circle, testing weak spots. Ethan ran back toward the supply shed, grabbed the sound deterrent, the old canister that fired a pulse loud enough to mimic thunder. He yanked the safety pin and threw it. The explosion cracked the air, echoing across the canyon. The coyotes scattered, tails low, melting into the shadows. For a few seconds, only silence. Then a low, eerie chorus rose from the ridge, a howl, joined by another and another, until it became a sound that filled the sky. It wasn't retreat. It was communication. Ethan cursed under his breath. They were regrouping. He turned to head back toward the office and stopped. A shape was moving near the smaller enclosure, a low, sleek shadow that wasn't a coyote. His heart skipped. He moved closer, light shaking slightly in his hand. The beam caught golden fur. Luna. She was back, her body pressed close to the outer fence, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond. The fur along her spine was raised, tail lashing. She was growling, a deep, raw sound that no cage could contain. Ethan's throat tightened. "How the hell did you—" She turned toward him, her eyes burning in the light, then back to the fence. The coyotes had returned to the edge of the property, drawn by her scent. The pack spread out, their movements precise, deliberate. Scar stayed at the front, pacing. Ethan shouted, trying to drive them off, but it only made them bolder. The line between wild and man was thinning with every second. He ran to the main gate and pulled the alarm cord. A siren blared, cutting through the still night, startling the smaller animals awake. Luna roared in response, her first full roar, deep and trembling, echoing through the metal walls. The sound froze the coyotes mid-step. Even Scar hesitated. "Atta girl," Ethan whispered. The lights around the sanctuary flickered on, high-powered LED floodlights, the kind marketed for home security and wildlife control. The desert lit up like day, every rock casting a sharp shadow. The coyotes blinked, confused. Ethan grabbed the tranquilizer rifle from the truck, loading the last 2 darts. "Stay inside, Luna," he muttered, as if she could understand. He stepped beyond the outer fence, boots sinking into soft sand. The coyotes had pulled back a little, but hadn't left. Scar growled low, a sound that vibrated through the ground. Ethan aimed the rifle and fired once, the dart striking one of the younger coyotes in the flank. It yelped and stumbled away. The others backed up farther. Only Scar remained. They faced each other under the pale floodlight, the man and the predator, both tired of the same war. "Go home," Ethan said softly. "This isn't your fight anymore." For a long moment, nothing moved. Then Scar's ears twitched. He turned, gave a short bark, and the rest followed. One by one, they vanished into the night, tails low, until the desert swallowed them whole. Ethan lowered the rifle, exhaling for what felt like the first time in hours. The siren wound down, leaving a faint ringing in his ears. When he turned back, Luna was still standing there, staring at him through the fence. Her eyes were wide, her breathing steady now. He walked closer, kneeling so their faces were level. "It's okay," he said quietly. "They're gone." She blinked slowly, then brushed her head against the wire just once, before stepping back into the darkness of her pen. Maya's truck headlights appeared in the distance, bouncing over the uneven road. She climbed out, barefoot in her pajamas, her hair pulled into a messy bun. "I heard the alarm all the way from town." "It's handled," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. She looked past him and gasped. "Luna? Ethan, she's back." He nodded. "Yeah. Came home on her own." Maya's eyes softened. Maybe she was never meant to be gone. He smiled faintly. Or maybe she came to remind us that the wild never really leaves you. Together they walked the fence line one last time, making sure it held. The night had turned still again, the stars reappearing, bright and steady. Somewhere far out, a lone howl rose, softer this time, not a threat, but a farewell. Maya leaned against the fence, folding her arms. "You know," she said, "I think she trusts you more than she should." Ethan chuckled. "That makes two of us." They stood there in the silver light, watching Luna settle near the back of her pen, her tail curled around her body. The desert stretched endlessly beyond, beautiful and unforgiving. But for now, balance had returned. When Ethan finally walked back toward the office, the floodlights clicked off behind him, one by one, until only moonlight remained. He looked over his shoulder once more and saw the faint outline of Luna through the wire. Still awake, still watching the horizon. He whispered, almost to himself, "You're going to be fine, kid. You're part of this land now." And from somewhere deep in the distance, the desert answered. Not with a roar or howl, but with the sound of wind moving through the cacti, steady and eternal, like the heartbeat of the world. The morning broke slow and red, spilling over the mountains like a slow heartbeat. The storm was long gone, but the air still carried its ghost, cool, clean, electric. Inside the sanctuary, everything felt suspended. Even the wind seemed to wait. Ethan stood outside Luna's pen, his hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee gone cold. She was pacing again, muscles smooth and strong beneath her golden coat. Every movement told him what his heart already knew. She didn't belong here anymore. Maya joined him a moment later, carrying a clipboard and that same look of quiet understanding she wore whenever a release was near. "You can feel it, can't you?" she asked. He nodded without looking at her. "Like the air before rain." She smiled softly. "She's ready." He set the mug down, crossing his arms. "Yeah, I just don't know if I am." "Ethan," Maya said, her voice gentle but steady. "You didn't rescue her to keep her. You rescued her to remind yourself what letting go looks like." He didn't answer. Instead, he knelt by the gate, watching Luna's eyes follow the movement of a hawk overhead. It circled once, twice, then soared higher, disappearing into the light. By noon, they had everything packed, a transport cage lined with canvas, a cooler of supplies, and a tranquilizer kit just in case. The plan was simple. Drive 3 hours north to the high canyon where permanent water flowed year-round and few humans ever went. A perfect spot for a mountain lion to begin again. Before they left, Ethan stopped by the office to file one last note. "Wildlife release report," the header read. Under species, he wrote, "Mountain lion, female, subadult." Under comments, "Healthy, confident, capable." Then, without thinking, he added a final line. "She taught me more than I taught her." The drive began in silence. The road curved along the base of the mountains, the landscape shifting from pale sand to green brush. Maya handled the paperwork while Ethan kept his eyes ahead. Country music played faintly from the radio, old, soft, full of static. Somewhere in the middle of the song, he murmured, "Funny how quiet the truck feels without her making noise." She's still here, Maya said. Just not the same way. They stopped once to refuel in a small border town station. A sign above the counter advertised life insurance plans and home security systems, promising peace of mind for unpredictable times. Ethan smirked at the irony. Peace of mind didn't exist, not for men who'd spent their lives serving something wild. By the time they reached the foothills of Santa Catalina, the sky was soft blue and the heat had broken. The terrain grew rugged. Boulders, narrow trails, sharp grass whispering against the truck's tires. They parked near a dry riverbed where a spring bubbled under a ledge. "This is it," Maya said quietly. "Good hunting grounds, shade, water, enough prey." Ethan nodded. He unlocked the cage. The door swung open with a faint creak. Luna stayed inside for a moment, crouched low, eyes darting between them and the open wild ahead. "Take your time," Ethan murmured. "The world's yours now." She stepped forward cautiously, paws touching the dirt, nostrils flaring at the scent of freedom. For a long moment, she stood there, her body tense, ready to spring. But she didn't move. She turned her head toward Ethan, eyes locking on his. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even goodbye. It was something older, a silent recognition between two beings who had survived the same kind of loneliness. Then she moved, fast and graceful, disappearing into the canyon shadows. Ethan exhaled, realizing he'd been holding his breath. "That's that." Maya touched his arm. "You okay?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah. Just feels like the desert took something from me again." "The desert doesn't take," she said softly. "It trades." They packed the empty cage back into the truck. The sun was sliding down now, painting the cliffs orange and gold. Ethan walked a few steps away from the road, stopping at the edge of the drop-off. The wind was stronger here, lifting dust into the air. From somewhere below came a faint rustle. A bird's wings, or maybe something larger. He thought of all the years he'd spent chasing balance, between life and death, duty and instinct, rules and mercy. And he realized that maybe balance wasn't something you found. Maybe it was something you learned to live inside of, one hard choice at a time. They camped by the river that night, too tired to drive back. The stars came out one by one, stretching across the black like scattered embers. Maya built a small fire, feeding it dry mesquite wood until it crackled. "You ever think about quitting?" she asked after a while. Ethan stared into the flames. "Every day. Then something like her happens, and I remember why I stay." "Because you need saving too?" He chuckled quietly. "Something like that." The coyotes began to howl in the distance, their voices carrying through the canyon. It wasn't a challenge this time, more a song, rising and falling in rhythm. Maya looked toward the sound. "Think that's them?" "Scar and his pack, probably." "You think they'll leave her alone?" Ethan poked the fire, sending sparks up into the night. "Out here, respect is worth more than fear. She earned it." The night deepened. When the fire burned low, he lay back on the sand, hands folded behind his head. The sky above was endless, the Milky Way sharp as silver dust. Somewhere out there, Luna was moving through the same starlight, hunting, surviving, free. He smiled in the dark. "Good luck, kid." A light breeze passed over the camp, whispering through the trees. For a second, he could almost swear he heard her call echo back, soft and distant, rolling down the canyon walls. The next morning, they broke, camp early. As they loaded the truck, Maya found something near the tire tracks, a small paw print in the damp earth. Fresh. "She came back?" Maya asked, crouching to look. Ethan studied it for a moment, then shook his head with a grin. No, she just wanted us to know she's fine. They climbed into the truck and started the long drive home. The radio crackled with static before settling on a talk show about environmental protection grants and eco-friendly housing loans. The host cheerfully promising a better tomorrow. Ethan reached over and turned it off. He preferred the sound of the tires on dirt and the wind through the open window. As the sanctuary came into view in the distance, he felt a weight lift from his chest. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about loss or duty. He was thinking about beginnings. The desert had taken, yes, but it had also given. It had given him Luna, given him purpose again, given him a reminder that life didn't need permission to start over. He parked the truck and looked once more toward the horizon. The heat was already rising off the sand, blurring the line between earth and sky. Somewhere out there, a young mountain lion moved through the wild, carrying his faith with her. And as the sun climbed higher, burning gold through the clouds, the world felt, for just a moment, perfectly balanced. A year passed before Ethan saw her again. Or at least, he thought he did. The seasons had rolled through the Sonoran desert like slow tides of color. Winter rains had painted the cliffs green, spring had scattered yellow blooms across the valleys, and summer had burned everything clean again. Life, as always, kept its rhythm. The sanctuary had changed too. New enclosures, better solar panels, and a handful of volunteers eager to learn what Maya and Ethan had spent their lives understanding. Ethan had retired from field patrol 6 months earlier, officially at least. Unofficially, he still did what he'd always done. Walked the desert, checked the cameras, and listened. He told the new rangers it wasn't about duty anymore. It was about memory. The desert remembered everything, he said. And sometimes, if you were quiet enough, it remembered you too. That morning, he loaded his truck before sunrise, heading north toward the ridge where he'd released Luna. The road shimmered under the early light, long and empty. He drove with the windows down, letting the cool air roll through. The radio mumbled about auto insurance, retirement investment plans, and the rising demand for solar energy jobs in the Southwest. He smiled at the irony. People in offices talking about sustainability while the real balance was out here, walking on 4 silent paws. By mid-morning, he reached the old trailhead. The land looked different now, cleaner somehow, more alive. He parked and began the climb, his steps slow but steady. Every breath carried the scent of creosote and wet stone, the smell of survival. Halfway up, he stopped by a stream that cut through the canyon. The water was clear, moving in small ripples over smooth rock. He crouched to refill his canteen and noticed the prints near the edge. One large set, one smaller. Cat prints, fresh. His pulse quickened. "Luna," he murmured, almost laughing at himself. He followed the tracks uphill, past a grove of twisted juniper trees, until he reached a ledge that overlooked the valley. From there he could see everything. The rolling desert stretching to the horizon, the thin silver thread of the river, and on the far ridge, a shape moving between the shadows. It was her. Even at that distance, he knew. Her coat gleamed like sunlight on bronze, her stride smooth, powerful, effortless. 2 smaller shapes followed close behind, stumbling slightly, learning to walk the wild the way she once had. Cubs. Ethan's chest tightened. He raised his binoculars, the world narrowing to that single frame. Luna standing tall beside her offspring, watching them play in the dust. She was full grown now, confident and unbroken. He laughed softly under his breath. "You did it, girl." He stayed there for a long time, not moving, not speaking, afraid that even breathing might shatter the moment. The cubs wrestled, one tumbling over the other before chasing a grasshopper into the scrub. Luna watched, calm and patient, her tail twitching with quiet authority. Then, as if sensing him, she lifted her head and looked across the distance. Their eyes met through a mile of open air. For a heartbeat, it felt like everything had come full circle. The day he'd found her bleeding in the sand, the nights spent keeping her alive, the release, the silence, the waiting. All of it led to this single moment of recognition. And then, as suddenly as she'd appeared, she turned and vanished into the canyon with her young. Ethan lowered the binoculars. The desert hummed softly around him, the same tune it had always played. Life, death, balance. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. He sat down on a flat rock and pulled out his notebook. He'd kept it for years, field notes, sketches, observations. He wrote a single line at the top of a fresh page. The wild doesn't need saving. It just needs remembering. A hawk screamed overhead, circling once before gliding toward the horizon. When he returned to the sanctuary that evening, Maya was waiting on the porch. She had more gray in her hair now, but her eyes were still sharp. "You went back," she said, handing him a glass of water. He nodded. "Saw her." Her eyebrows lifted. "You're sure?" "Yeah, she's not alone anymore." Maya smiled, a mix of pride and something softer. "Then I guess we did something right." He looked out over the desert, the sunset bleeding into crimson and gold. "We didn't fix the world, Maya. We just made one corner of it remember how to heal itself." She tilted her head. "Maybe that's what fixing the world looks like." They stood there in silence for a while, listening to the wind move through the dry grass. Behind them, the sanctuary lights began to flicker on, powered by the new solar grid the volunteers had installed, small reminders of progress built on lessons from the wild. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out the woven bracelet, the one Emily had made all those years ago. The threads were frayed, but the pattern still held. He turned it over in his hand, smiling. "I think she'd have liked this ending." Maya's voice was soft. "Who?" He slipped the bracelet back into his pocket. "All of them." Later that night, after everyone had gone, he walked the fence line one last time. The moon hung low and full, lighting the sand in silver. Somewhere far away, a faint roar rolled through the air. Low, steady, unmistakable. It wasn't loud enough to wake the animals, but he heard it. He closed his eyes and let the sound wash over him. It wasn't a call for help. It was a song of place, a declaration that the wild still had a voice, and that someone, somewhere, was listening. He smiled. "I hear you, kid." As he walked back toward the office, the desert seemed to breathe again. Slow, measured, alive. The wind carried the scent of mesquite and dust, the same scent that had filled his first day in uniform decades ago. He thought of how much time he'd spent fighting against nature's indifference, and how, in the end, it had been compassion, not control, that restored balance. When he reached the porch, he turned for one last look at the open land. The horizon shimmered in the moonlight, vast and infinite, every grain of sand part of a story bigger than any man could write. Maybe that was the point, he thought, to do your part, and then step back. He switched off the lights, leaving the sanctuary in darkness. For a moment, it was completely still. Then, faint but unmistakable, the sound of tiny paws skittered across the gravel. Maybe a fox, maybe something smaller. Life going on, indifferent and eternal. Ethan locked the door, whispered, "Balance." and walked inside. Behind him, the desert kept its secrets. Somewhere under the same sky, Luna guided her cubs along the ridge, teaching them how to listen, how to hunt, how to survive. And far above, the stars burned cold and constant, marking another night in a world that, at least for now, had remembered how to live in peace.